Good day. The other day, the British House of Commons held what I consider to be the single most delusional debate in its long history. I am tempted to say that it showed itself to be not a House of Commons, but a House of Fools. The topic, of course, was Afghanistan in light of the victory of the Taliban in that country and the comments made by President Biden of the United States that under his watch, the United States will act in its interests and not engage in democracy promotion. Both the victory of the Taliban and these comments by President Biden seemed to provoke across the House of Commons collective outrage, with MPs venting their anger on our hapless Prime Minister Boris Johnson and on our hapless Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, as if there was anything either of these two men could have done which would have changed or affected or influenced in any way the situation. I have to say that some of the suggestions or implications that took place, that one heard over this debate, that Britain supposedly by itself or heading some kind of fool's crusade of European powers could change the situation in Afghanistan and could have prevented a Taliban victory where the mighty United States has failed, seemed to me borderline surreal. As for the suggestion that one day the British might have to return to Afghanistan and resume the war there, presumably without the United States, in the hope one day of achieving victory there, when the reality is that the British Army failed abysmally when it was deployed in Helmand province in the late 2000s and had to be rescued by the United States. Well, all I could say about that is that those comments strike me as borderline insane. The most bizarre and ludicrous comment of all, in my opinion, was made by our former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who asked rhetorically and ridiculously, where is global Britain on the streets of Kabul? The answer, of course, is nowhere at all, nor could it ever be. The British at this moment are hiding in Kabul airport under the protection of the American military, and it could scarcely have been otherwise given the realities of British power. That a former British Prime Minister could indulge in this fantasy, these rhetorical fantasies, and be heard in the House of Commons with respect and support from other MPs, I have to say, struck me as being completely bizarre and beyond staggering. It is also very disturbing and very alarming that the British political leadership are so completely out of touch with world realities and talk and behave as if Victoria was still our Queen and Empress, so that we can change events around the world and shape them according to our wishes, as we once could during her long reign, or that Winston Churchill was still our Prime Minister, with Britain still able to exert global power in the way he could when he was Prime Minister long ago in the mid-20th century. Those days of British imperial power are over, and we should not look back or regret that fact. Rather, we should accept that reality and perhaps, as I believe, even embrace it. In reality, when you actually peel down through all the comments, and what the overwhelming impression one gets is that what these people in the House of Commons believe is that Britain should continue to exercise that role which it had in Queen Victoria's and Winston Churchill's days, but that since it lacks the power to do so, it should somehow manage to persuade the United States to lend its power to Britain so that Britain can act out these imperial fantasies which it no longer has by itself the power to do. In other words, they want to harness American power in order to act out their own imperial fantasies. That is an absurd, manipulative attitude to the United States, which is bound ultimately to fail, given that the United States, like every other country, will ultimately and eventually act in its own interests. I would add that it is a deeply immoral position for British politicians to expect American presidents to put American lives and American money on the line, so that British politicians like Tony Blair and Theresa May can strut and pose in the British Parliament and pretend in some way that they are at the top of the world. I say all of this, and I would add that one of the countries which today is indisputably a great power made all of these points to the British in a conversation, a telephone conversation that took place just the day before this bizarre debate in the House of Commons took place. And that great power is, of course, China, and the messenger who lectured the British about the realities of Afghanistan, which the British have completely forgotten or overlooked, was Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. And the Chinese, who have a complex relationship with the British, to put it mildly, having themselves been, of course, the targets of British imperialism in the 19th century, judging from the very long readout of the conversation which they have provided, did not hesitate or mince their words in the advice, or rather perhaps the lesson that they read out to the British. And I'm going to read out this readout in full, at least those parts of it which address the question of Afghanistan. This is what Wang Yi said, and I quote, as I said, from the readout of the conversation provided by the Chinese Foreign Ministry. It reads as follows. On August 19th, 2021, State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi had a phone conversation with British First Secretary of State and Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab at his request. Both sides exchanged views on the situation in Afghanistan and on China-Britain relations. Wang Yi said the major change to the situation in Afghanistan reflects the fact that after more than 40 years of war, the Afghan people yearn for stability and do not want another war or chaos. It also shows that the governance model imposed from outside has not been supported by the Afghan people and lacks social foundation. Relying on military intervention to solve regional hotspot issues will lead nowhere. The situation in Afghanistan is yet another negative example, and if the United States does not learn from the painful lessons, it will suffer new ones. Note that Wang Yi refers to the United States, but of course by implication he's talking about Britain too. Wang Yi noted that as the Afghan issue has entered a critical stage from military settlement to political settlement, the following aspects should be focused on. First, whether the Taliban can unite the Afghan people, establish an open and inclusive political structure in line with the country's conditions, pursue moderate policies, and avoid triggering new conflicts or even a single civil war. Second, whether Afghanistan can draw a clear line from terrorism, crack down on all kinds of terrorist organizations, and avoid becoming a gathering place for terrorists again. Third, whether the international community could play a constructive role. The international community should fully respect the independence and sovereignty of Afghanistan and the will of its people, conduct more dialogue and provide more guidance, refrain from a predetermined mindset and exceeding one's duties to meddle in other affairs, and not turn Afghanistan into an arena of geopolitical games. Wang Yi stressed that the following situation in Afghanistan is still unstable and uncertain, and the international community should encourage and guide it in a positive direction instead of exerting excessive pressure. This is conducive to the early political transition by the Taliban and other political forces in the country, the stabilization of the domestic situation in Afghanistan, and the reduction of the impact of refugees and immigrants. China is willing to continue to play a constructive role in the Afghan issue without interfering in its internal affairs. I have to say that these comments of Wang Yi to Dominic Raab seem to me to set out in a nutshell the political position of China and of course also of Russia, and they are infused, I might say, with a realism, a practical grasp of the actual issues, which was so singularly absent in the House of Commons in that disastrous debate. Instead of people frothing at the mouth, talking wildly about where is global Britain on the streets of Kabul, instead of ludicrous comments about intervening in Afghanistan again, we see China working hard to try to persuade the Taliban to moderate its policies, to set up a government that will extend its reach to include all the various communities and ethnicities of Afghanistan in order, in other words, to achieve peace in the country, which, by the way, Wang Yi is absolutely right. That is what the overwhelming majority of the people in Afghanistan, according to every survey at the moment, most want in order to achieve for Afghanistan a prosperous and stable future, which will ensure that that country cannot become and will not become, as it so disastrously was, a place of refuge for dangerous and violent jihadi terrorist groups that have caused so much mayhem around the world. Contrast these words of constructive engagement with the real political forces in Afghanistan, the Taliban included, with the delusional claims about intervening in Afghanistan, about losing Afghanistan, about one day preventing the Taliban from establishing its position there, and about courting groups like the group that has now set itself up in the Panjshir Valley and which seems to want to restart the war. Well, did Dominic Raab listen to what Wang Yi said, or did it all float past him? I have to say, I suspect the second. Dominic Raab came in for intense criticism in the House of Commons debate, partly because he was on holiday, on leave in Cyprus at the time when the events in Afghanistan were taking place. But in reality and in fact, he is, as far as I can see, someone who holds to essentially the same orthodoxies, the same bizarre and delusional orthodoxies as the rest of the British political class. Note that nowhere in this readout do the Chinese say how Dominic Raab responded to this careful and polite lesson in realpolitik that Wang Yi gave him. I suspect that he probably just listened and paid no attention and went back to his officials in the Foreign Office and said all the same things, all the usual absurdities and nonsense that I'm afraid we've come to expect from the British. As for why he called Wang Yi, well, we can guess the answer to that. It is to try to protect or get China's help to ensure that the British people in Kabul are evacuated safely from the country. Though again, it's perhaps striking to say that there is nothing said about this in the readout between Raab and Wang Yi either. I would add that it's clear from the readout that the British and the Chinese did discuss also other topics about how relations between China and Britain might be improved. Little chance of that, in my opinion, and about how to cooperate to deal with the pandemic. The latter, I'm afraid, has become very much part of China's usual talking points when Chinese officials speak with the officials of other countries. But of course, the main topic, as is clear, was Afghanistan, and it is that which I have focused upon in this program. Well, as I said, the British are almost certainly not going to pay any attention to the things that Wang Yi said, and I doubt very much, by the way, that Dominic Raab is even going to report them to the Cabinet, much less, of course, to the House of Commons. And perhaps that's the overriding lesson to take from this, because since those days when Victoria was our Queen and Empress, British power has steadily ebbed away and declined. Whereas China, once a target in the 19th century for British imperialist aggression, is now once again a great power. China, of course, has a fully operating embassy in Kabul, as Russia also does. And the reason for these things, the reason why China, and by the way Russia, are great powers today, whilst Britain visibly is not, is because the Chinese, and by the way also the Russians, still retain their practical, hard-headed realism, which the British, by contrast, have so completely lost. That is the true lesson to take away from this affair. And I'm afraid that that decline of British power will continue whilst the British continue to indulge in dreams and fantasies of the sort that we heard so much in the British House of Commons the other day. I'm afraid the reality today in Britain is that our political class are no longer fit for purpose, and it's a fact that British people of all political complexions, left and right, needs to understand and work towards as we search for a future for our country. Thank you very much for joining me on this program today. I look forward to you joining me in future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, as well as on our other platforms, BitChute, Library, ODYSEE, and SuperU, the free speech platform, and also especially on Rumble and Locals where we have a thriving community and where I will very shortly be doing live streams. I will make an announcement briefly in a video before I do. And also, please remember to support us via PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar, and to go to our shop to buy the amazing things that we have there. Here you see me with my magic mug with the British Union Jack, and also justified, given that Britain is the topic of my discussion today. And please also look up our other amazing things, our amazing Duran hats, our t-shirts, our sweatshirts, our long sleeve shirts, our hoodies, and all the rest. And thank you for joining me for this program today. I'm sorry if I got a bit passionate, but Britain is, after all, my own country. And I look forward to you joining me again soon, both on this channel and on our main channel, where I do programs with Alex Christoforou, my friend and colleague. And please also, by the way, remember to check out his channel. And please also, if you've liked this video, remember to tick the subscribe button and also the like button and check your subscription to this video. And thank you for joining me again today. And I look forward to you joining me again soon. And have a wonderful day until then.